Um, I present to you, and I've been meaning to play this for a while. Senator Hawley, that one clip that went viral, where he was with that one professor, and she said that his his line of questioning is transphobic. This is the kind of thing that Republicans seize on because it is quite obviously misguided by the ideological presuppositions of the left, and it deviates in a fundamental way from a lot of commonsensical notions that a lot of people on the right just take for granted. And there doesn't seem to be much reason to deny a lot of the things that are implicitly denied by this ideology. And so this really is effective in getting people to have a certain kind of like lack of desire to associate with progressives, because they say shit like this that is generally regarded as just weird, absurd, quixotic, and or false. And I think that there are all kinds of there's political import to doing this, and this is why Republicans keep bringing it up and they keep seizing on it. And it's visceral. Like people like me who are in the middle and who don't really fuck with this woke shit and don't really fuck with this gender ideology shit, and it doesn't really make sense to us, and we're really trying to understand it. Like I've listened to all the arguments, I've tested them, I've re-listened to them, I've tried to articulate it myself to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding anything, and I still don't fucking understand this shit. And it's not because I'm stupid, and it's not because I'm willfully dense, and it's not because I'm gung-ho about Republicans or I'm particularly MAGA. It's because the shit kind of doesn't make any fucking sense. But here's what I want to
Mr. Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
All right, so here's what's going on here, because I've seen this video so many times. So fundamentally, people of this persuasion, people who are more left-leaning progressive types, and this professor kind of epitomizes that, their whole kind of stance is like, we want to be inclusive in addressing issues that implicate what most of us might refer to as women. She's using a term that I think she thinks of as more inclusive, and that's people with the capacity for pregnancy. And it's a little bit more long-winded, but it's a way of getting at like the core of the people that we're talking about are people who have the capacity to become pregnant, because obviously they're implicated in the abortion debate, right? Some of the people who have the capacity for pregnancy do not identify as women. Some of the people who have the capacity for pregnancy identify as men for whatever reason, for better or worse. And fundamentally, because of her stance, it's pretty obvious. She regards that as a legitimate thing that a person can do. If a person has the capacity for pregnancy and they identify for whatever reason, maybe they experience gender dysphoria, maybe they think of themselves as masculine, maybe they feel in every fiber of their being that they're a man, but they have the anatomy associated with human females, and therefore, in virtue of that, can have the capacity for pregnancy. We don't have to refer to them as women in order to include them in this under this issue. That's the stance that she's demonstrating with her responses right now. Okay. She's about to become perturbed by Senator Hawley's questioning, because it's fairly obvious that Senator Hawley is pinching a nerve with respect to that core contention, which is a contention that Republicans and conservative types fundamentally disagree with. They do not think that a person with a capacity for pregnancy can be anything other than a woman, period. Only women can get pregnant is the contention. We've known this for decades. And up until 5 minutes ago, everybody knew that. And now all of a sudden, the woke tarded radicals are saying weird shit. That's the contention. That's the presupposition. That's what they think. And Senator Hawley is asking questions designed in such a way as to get this person to say the thing that is off-putting to a lot of people, not just conservatives, but people like me who are in the middle or who are independent. We don't fuck with that shit either. And actually, there's some people who lean left who don't fuck with that shit either. They like the progressive stuff, but they don't like that shit. That shit's weird to them. Bill Maher would be an example of this. So Senator Hawley is playing political games, but But the way that he's playing political games and the way that a lot of Republicans are playing political games is pretty clever. They're asking questions designed in such a way as to force the woke people into saying ridiculous woke shit that the vast majority of the people in the country do not fucking agree with, in order to expose them and then make, by association, anything that they're advocating for, no matter how much validity it actually has, look bad. That's what they're doing. They're engaging in that kind of political inside baseball. So, with that said, I can understand why a person might object to Senator Hawley's line of questioning on that basis, because he's doing something very clever. And you could say it's disingenuous. I don't know how disingenuous or dishonest it is, because I think Senator Hawley genuinely disagrees with this point of view. I don't think he's pretending to disagree with it. I think he genuinely disagrees with it. So I don't know how disingenuous it is. If you want to say it's dishonest, I don't know how dishonest it is, because getting a person to admit something that they actually think that you happen to know most people don't agree with is going to make them look bad, and it's going to make your side look good. I don't know how unfair that is. I don't know how intellectually dishonest that is, but there's at least an argument, I guess, there. So if you want to regard that as disingenuous or dishonest, maybe, but like, I don't know. I would say the same thing in reverse. If you were gonna ask questions from the point of view of a progressive that you know that people on the other side genuinely agree with, and that is wildly unpopular. And by the way, progressives do this all the time, and I know they do, and they have no problem with it when they do it. So like, if you're gonna object to it when the Republicans do it, you got to object to it when the leftists do it. Like, you can't have it both ways, fam. Like, stop it. Right? So when you ask questions that are devised to get people to admit that the 2020 election was stolen, because you know that the vast majority of people are going to cringe when they hear that shit, they're going to be like, them motherfuckers are radical, them motherfuckers are MAGA retarded, I don't fuck with that shit, I'm voting against that. Right? Leftists do that too. That's an example. I've heard leftists do that shit too. I've heard leftists do that shit too. That's just one example. There's all kinds of other issues that you can do that with Republicans on too, and get them to say all kind of shit that doesn't make any sense. So that's what's going on kind of below the surface. But this exchange is a really quick kind of manifestation of a whole bunch of different presuppositions that are going head to head, and then they're manifesting themselves in a very particular way. Let's keep watching.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
All right, so she's a little smug in her expression of it, but there's something valid under the surface of what she just expressed, which is there's no real, from the point of view of a progressive person, with all of the kind of, philosophical underpinnings and presuppositions that they have, there's no real reason to pit women against trans people to address this issue, right? That's what she's basically trying to say. She said it in a more smug way, but those things aren't mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley, right? Like we can recognize and affirm the dignity of trans people and non-binary people's identities, and also address the abortion issue, right? So at the core here are people with the capacity for pregnancy, because those are the people implicated in abortion, according to this, right? We don't have to worry about the label game that you want to play, Senator Hawley. And the way that she kind of smirks and smiles, I think part of what she's expressing is, I recognize what you're doing, and I'm not going to fall for it. That's part of what she's expressing. It comes off as really fucking smug, but I understand kind of what she's getting at is like, nah, you're not gonna catch me. I got you. Like, that's not gonna work, right? Let's continue to watch.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So Senator Hawley's trying to get at something. Was like, all right, well, once you admit that men in some sense are implicated in this, then you lose the ability to say that this is a women's issue. So if you can't say it's a women's issue because tacitly you're including men into the category of people with the capacity for pregnancy, then what kind of issue is it? Are you going to absolve yourself from saying that this is a women's issue? Are you going to punt on that? Is this no longer a women's issue? And so what would be the replacement then? Is it a people with the capacity for pregnancy issue as opposed to a women's issue? Because this has historically been regarded as a quintessentially women's issue. The feminists have a long-standing history of regarding this as a women's issue. Do you want to abdicate that? Do you want to punt on that right now? Do you really want to do that? Because that has all kinds of implications for the feminist critiques that seem lost on you oh, smart professor person. This is the kind of thing that he's getting at. He's not explicitly saying all of this, but that's what he's getting at. So his challenge is actually kind of clever. And it's actually it reflects thoughts that I've had about this too. But she's now about to pivot to something completely different. As opposed to taking his implications of his question head on, she's about to switch and accuse him of being transphobic, which drives me crazy because it seems like there's a pattern. Anytime you start catching progressives slipping by holding their feet to the fire and trying to get them to like actually like legitimize on rational grounds what they believe, every now and then, like almost always without fail, they will end up accusing you of being transphobic, homophobic, racist, bigoted, all of that stuff. And she's about to do that shit. It's almost like they can't help themselves.
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
Because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist
I'm
is
denying that trans people exist by asking
Are you?
So, and honestly, I think she just clearly loses at that point because one, she's not taking up the challenge that he's implying, but not saying explicitly head on. And there's something disingenuous about that from my point of view. But more importantly, it seems like these are conditioned responses. These are like talking points that she almost is robotically regurgitating. Now, I think she may actually genuinely believe them, to be fair. But it seems like when in doubt, the playbook is start spewing accusations of transphobia and start going in on how your transphobia is negatively impacting such and such a group of people. So the message seems to be, if I'm not mistaken, that Senator Hawley's line of questioning, which is devised in some sense to fundamentally undermine core tenets that have come from the left historically, feminist critiques, the contention that pregnancy generally and the abortion issue in particular is something that is quintessentially a women's issue, is technically no longer just a women's issue, because you have at least some men, i.e. trans men, that can get pregnant and therefore are implicated in this issue, right? Like, there's something fundamentally at odds or in tension with that, and it's an implication of the ways in which the left has deviated further left on these issues that they haven't properly contended with. And to put that in their face in this context, so where they have to contend with that tension in a public way when they clearly haven't done so, has all kinds of political value for people who are trying to make these people look as stupid as possible, particularly if they're people who are esteemed professors at major reputable universities, right? There's a lot at stake politically with doing that. And I think that Senator Hawley's engaged in that kind of thing. But in order to deflect away from that clear weakness in the position, this professor launches a tirade about how Senator Hawley's line of questioning is in some non-trivial sense, and I think she probably genuinely believes this, in some non-trivial sense, contributing to trends by which to trends whereby trans people are subjected to all kinds of violence, right? And according to her, and she didn't articulate it very well because their exchange got really heated and they kept going back and forth or whatever. And I think she would have got space to articulate this better. She might have been able to be charitable to her. But there's something about his line of questioning which has some kind of non-trivial connection with trends that open up trans people to violence, is what she's trying to argue. And it has something to do with pretending that trans people don't exist, apparently, according to her, right? Denying that they exist or pretending as if they don't exist opens up trans people to violence, right? And his line of questioning, I guess, implicitly either pretends or denies that trans people exist. Now, What's weird about that argument is that it doesn't seem like there's anything about his questions that denies that trans people exist. He's not really concerned with the ontological status of trans people. And in fact, I think that Senator Hawley would acknowledge that trans people exist. I think that he would just say, is those people over there who are trans, who actually exist, their claims about their own gender identity are wrong. I think that would say. I think that that's the most steelman version of the conservative position that one could muster. And it doesn't seem like many people on the left are willing to deal with that head on. It's almost like they're foisting a weakness onto an argument that the argument doesn't even necessarily entail. And that's weird. Like that's straw manning. Simply put, you don't have to straw man their argument. You can disagree with their contentions as it is, right? I don't think that Senator Hawley or most conservatives are interested in denying the ontological status of trans people. They think that they exist. They just don't think that they are what they say that they are, right? Equating that to saying that they don't exist is just weird. It's a weird rhetorical move that I guess maybe has some kind of benefit rhetorically, which would explain why it's so commonly used, because maybe it makes it easier to contend that Republicans aren't dealing with reality because they're putting their head in the sand and they're acting like trans people don't exist when they really do, so that they can pretend as if they don't have to deal with the grievance claims of trans people. They just turn a blind eye to them. I guess that rhetoric makes that seem more plausible. So maybe that's the benefit of it. I don't know. At this point, I'm just speculating. And then there's going to be some weird exchange I'm not really interested in, where Senator Hawley is, insulting her professor, like her engagement with him, and he asks her if this is how she engages with her students. And then she had some weird kind of like, no, like you should actually attend our class. Like, I don't know if she was implying that he doesn't go to school or something, but I don't know. It was smug on both their parts, to be fair. But yeah, it's this is the kind of thing. And so like the way you perceive this exchange is really going to be colored by whether you buy into the presuppositions that are typically held by people right of center, or whether you buy into the presuppositions that are typically held by people left of center. Because apparently people on the left, progressive types, saw this exchange and thought that she owned him. And that's fascinating to me. That is fascinating to me. And I kind of get what they may have thought, right? Like if you put yourself in the point of view of the progressive, what Senator Hawley is doing is engaging in some form of transphobia. He's acting like he doesn't understand that trans people exist fundamentally with his line of questioning. He keeps trying to get her to use the term women when clearly there are people who are non-binary and trans who are implicated in this, because there are those people who have the capacity for pregnancy. Senator Hawley's acting like he doesn't understand that because he wants to win brownie points for his base and or fundraise, according to the Young Turks. Right. And so he's the one being disingenuous, and she put him in his place with that slay queen sister girl attitude and her her mild condescension. Right. Those things are not exclusive, Senator Hawley. Right. Like, yeah, slay queen. Yes, queen. Right. I can understand why that would appeal to people who are already kind of on board with this stuff, because fundamentally what they view her as doing is championing trans and non-binary people, centering their humanity in the discussion, not allowing the no bad, evil, very bad Republican to dictate the terms of the debate all the way down to the terminology that you're allowed to use. There's nothing confusing here, Senator Hawley. The people with the capacity for pregnancy are who we're talking about. Some of those people are men. Some of those people are women. Get over it. I know your backwards, regressive view of men and women, which is steeped in white supremacy and patriarchy anyway, doesn't conform to that. But you're going to have to get with the times. I'm not going to let you do that. I'm an educated person. Get off my back. Like, that whole attitude was conveyed in no uncertain terms by that exchange. And so if you are perceiving that in the exchange and you will buy into those presuppositions already and you agree with that, then you're basically viewing her as a champion for your perspective. And so you're going to be like, yeah, she owned him. On the other hand, if you're coming from right of center, then your perception of what happened is going to be very different. Your perception of what happened is fundamentally that, first of all, she dodged questions that she couldn't answer. She relied or stooped to name calling by insisting that he's transphobic because he asked very fair and sensible questions that she couldn't answer adequately, and she knew she couldn't answer adequately, or at least that's the presupposition. And so she deflected to some shit about how he's opening trans people to violence, which doesn't make any sense because it's not really clear how his line of questioning is in any way, shape, or form causally related to trans people being violated in some way, at least not literally, like physically, like every time he asks that question, a trans person gets beat up somewhere or something like that. Like it's not really clear. So there's kind of nebulous connection that she's relying on. She didn't explain it. There's a whole bunch of presuppositions probably built into that connection that she just drew, but she didn't explain it. And it didn't really seem to have anything to do with what he was actually asking, right? Like what he was implying or what he was suggesting or what he was asking, like gets at a core tension of this kind of new woke line of thought where even men can be included into this abortion issue, right? And how it deviates in a fundamental way from how feminists have been talking about this issue for a long time. And like the feminists that are still on the left side, like there's infighting about that on the left. And in some sense he's exposing the inconsistency there. But she didn't want to touch that. And she never even addressed it because she deflected to something else. Also, she's being perceived by a lot of people right of center as uber woke, uber radical, to the point of saying ridiculous shit like men can get pregnant. Like most people don't regard people who have the capacity for pregnancy as being men ever. Only and exclusively women can get pregnant. That is a biological fact. It's been a biological fact up until about 5 minutes ago. All of these are the presuppositions going on with the right. And with all of those presuppositions built into this, you're not going to perceive her as dunking on him. You're going to perceive Hawley as dunking on the professor. This is supposed to be a college professor. This is supposed to be an expert. This person has been called to be an expert witness. And what you're doing is you're demonstrating that this expert, quote unquote, is so blinded by their wokeness that they're saying ridiculous shit that an expert should never say. And even the layperson can see through that shit. So why would you vote for that? It has implications for politics. This political game to me is fascinating. Because all of this shit going on below the surface, people are able to intuit, but they don't unpack both sides. They typically only unpack one side and then project a whole bunch of things onto the other side. And that's just, man, I don't know. That's freaking fascinating to me. Let's end this.
If you're talking about women having pregnancies.
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get pregnant.
So you are denying that trans people exist?
So that part of the exchange also baffles me. Do you think that trans men can get pregnant, or men can get pregnant? And he's like, no, I don't think that. He's like, thank you. That demonstrates that you're denying the existence of trans people. You don't think trans people exist. I don't see how that conclusion follows. If one person, okay, so let me see if I can steel man the position. So if I believe that a person with the capacity for pregnancy can be a man because in virtue of the fact that their inner sense of self says they're a man, they're born in the wrong body, maybe, or they're born in a body that has the capacity for pregnancy, but they're a man, right? Then a person who denies that person is anything other than a woman is denying their status as a trans person. They're saying that that's not a thing. And so in that sense, they're saying that the trans person doesn't exist because there is no such thing as being trans. You're just a man or a woman. So in that sense, you're denying that trans people exist because you're denying that there is a legitimate situation or scenario under which a person could genuinely be trans. So maybe that's what they mean, right? Maybe that's what they mean. I think I did a pretty good job of steel manning that, I guess. So do you think that trans men can get pregnant? No. Well, there you go. You're denying that trans people exist because you're denying that there is any such scenario implicitly under which a person with the anatomy associated with what you would call a woman can nonetheless be a man. So you're denying, and the presupposition is we know that there are such people. We know that there are such people, and we take them at their word that they are what they say that they are. So you're denying that they exist is the linchpin that causes a whole bunch of headache for them being able to live their lives, because this undergirds all kinds of laws that prohibit them from getting the care that they need, etc. So you're denying that trans people exist. I think that's the sense in which they mean. That's the most steelman version of what that could possibly mean that I think makes sense. But even there, they're not talking about the ontological status of trans people. They're not saying that you, person who calls yourself trans, you don't exist. They're not saying that. They're saying you're declaring yourself trans or non-binary is not a legitimate thing. That's what they're saying. And so the subtle difference between those two is what I'm trying to elucidate. Is like, why wouldn't you just explicitly name, like, they're not pretending like you, like like if I was Senator Hawley and I'm talking with a person who identifies as trans, I wouldn't be like, I don't see you. Like, you're not there. Like, right? And I don't even think that she would expect Senator Hawley to act like that. Right? Like, I don't think most people who say that would expect a stereotypical conservative person who doesn't buy into the trans ideology to be like, to look at a to look at a trans person and be like, I don't see anything. I don't see anyone. What trans person? Right? Like, so that's clearly not what they mean. That's clearly not what they mean. Nobody thinks that. But the rhetoric makes it seem like that's what they're saying. That's weird. Like, you think trans people don't exist. Maybe it would be more accurate to say you think that trans people aren't legitimate. But then, yeah, but that doesn't have the zing, I guess. Right? Because it doesn't seem as ridiculous. I guess saying trans people don't exist makes it sound like the point of view that they espouse is more ridiculous than it actually is. So maybe that's the point of it. Maybe that's why they say it that way. Because it makes it sound like they're dumb enough to be like, like, there's a trans person in the room and they're just like, what trans person? I don't see anyone. Like, it makes it sound that silly. I think that's the point. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I'm projecting. I don't know, but like, it seems like that's the point. Because it's just not an accurate way to express what they think. But anyway.
That leads to violence. Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're told
allowed
that
to
they're
question me.
opening up people to violence?
We have a good
by
time in my
questioning?
class. You should join.
I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot
I
just in this
know,
exchange.
absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yep.
They're both so equally smug and condescending to each other. It's not even kind of worth commenting on that last little bit. But yeah. She did show some kind of resilience or whatever. She showed that, I'm not backing down or whatever, and she challenged it from her philosophical presuppositions or whatever. He did the same. Wow, that is just our politics, man. The state of our politics it's sad. It's fucking sad. But yeah, there was another exchange with Lauren Bobert. I'm only gonna show it briefly because I gotta go soon. I gotta go to work tomorrow. Can men get pregnant? Lauren Bobert tried this stunt. I don't think she was as successful though. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Becerra. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you coming before the committee. To start off, as a Secretary of Health and Human Services, can you define for this committee what is a man?
You're looking at one.
Great. So you are a man. I like that. Can you tell me, can men get pregnant?
Unless you know something I don't, I think the answer is pretty obvious.
What is that answer, sir?
I'm asking you, is there something you know that I don't know that would say that a man...
Well, I'm asking what you know. Can men get pregnant?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Secretary, materials coming from your department, you've referred to mothers as birthing persons, replacing that title with...
Are mothers not persons?
Mothers are persons, but it seems to be more inclusive, like you're trying to include another gender in that.
I'm all about inclusion, Congresswoman.
There you go. Well, just as a mother of 4 boys, I'm not necessarily offended at that. I am a person, but it's just unscientific and absurd.
How so?
To include men in that, if you're going to be
person?
inclusive, if you're going to be inclusive in birthing persons, yes.
Well, but it seems to me that you're
Let's
trying
back
to
up.
define the term.
Reclaiming my time. Can men get pregnant? So then we don't need to include them in this. Mothers are mothers. Moving forward, Mr. Secretary, I want to read for you from a document from your office, the Office of Population Affairs. It says in here, and I quote, "Gender-affirming care encompasses many facets of healthcare needs and support. It has been shown to increase positive outcomes for transgender and non-binary children." Mr. Secretary, what is a transgender child?
A child in America is a child in America, and I hope you and I can love that child just as much as we
Can you
love our own
define what a
children.
transgender child is?
That's a child in America, and it's an American citizen child who needs the services and love just the way any other child does.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe that a child is capable of making life-altering decisions to maim themselves?
So let me just say to you that I don't agree with your premise, but what I will say to you is children know much about themselves, and with the help of
Do you
their,
believe that children are capable of making the decision to self-mutilate?
again, I don't necessarily accept the
Well,
premise of your
Mr. Secretary, I
question.
mean, you have gender-affirming care for young people, so this is something that
I
you
don't
have
equate
looked over.
gender-affirming care to mutilation. So if that's where you're going, then you're not going to get the answer you want.
So, Mr. Secretary here, can you tell me if there have been mastectomies, mastectomies, penectomies, or hysterectomies on children?
Well,
And have taxpayers funded that?
so I could probably use the help of my wife, who's an OBGYN, who could talk more, or maybe Dr. Burgess could help us out here.
For gender-affirming care, to be included in that?
I'm sorry, pose the question one more time, please.
In this gender-affirming care, Mr. Secretary, have there been tax dollars put forward to fund mastectomies, penectomies, and hysterectomies for sex reassignment purposes for minors with gender dysphoria?
So Americans are entitled to receive healthcare services. If they are entitled to receive any of the services that you just mentioned, then it would be against the law for us to try to deny them that care.
So for the record, you favor HHS's funding being able for sex reassignment, for surgeries on minors?
I will do everything I can to defend any American, including children, whether or not they fit the categories you have mentioned or not, and if they talk about gender-affirming care, I am there to protect the rights of any American.
Mr. Secretary, I want to turn to a different document. Your office released this gender-affirming care is trauma-informed care. In this document, you clearly state that gender-affirming care includes puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries for minor children. You go on to assure parents that there is no scientifically sound reason to doubt hormones and surgeries are helpful to minor children. You also discuss this in a document that the potential for removing children from their parents is on the table if they're not providing gender-affirming care. Mr. Secretary, do you think that parents who believe in two genders only should have their children removed from them?
Secretary, Mr. Secretary, you can answer or respond in writing. Her time has expired.
I can respond very quickly. Congresswoman, I believe in supporting and protecting transgender youth. I believe that they, along with their parents and their caregivers, will make the best decisions. And I would really urge that politicians like you stay out of their business.
I would urge that children get to stay with their parents. No matter
Gentlewoman's
what
time has
parents-
expired. The committee
Mr.
will.
Chairman, may I please have unanimous?
No, you can't. No, you may not. We're on a very
to
tight time frame, and there are
Enter
votes
this into
being
the
called.
congressional record.
You may, oh, yes,
Thank you, sir.
without objection, you may do that. All right, the committee will be in recess. Please hurry back after the second vote.
All right, I tried to show that without interruption, mostly because I'm trying to make this go a little faster. I've been over here for two hours already. It's past my bedtime, but it seemed like Lauren Bobert tried to do something akin to what Senator Hawley tried to do, but with much less success. I don't know that her questions were as cleverly devised to prompt the kinds of responses that she wanted. I think that there were clear attempts to prompt certain kinds of responses and to get the director of HHS to say some of the weird woke-tarded nonsense that or at least that's how it would have been perceived by people right of center, so that he could have got exposed or whatever. His answers were clever. They seem to have been designed to appear innocuous, and or not to give Congresswoman Bobert what she wanted. So in some sense, she failed to prompt the response that she wanted. The dude that seemed to be more savvy about what was happening in real time. To a certain extent, I kind of admire that. But he did seem to dodge a lot of questions. He didn't seem to answer questions straight up at all. He seemed to pretend to not understand questions and prompt her to ask questions several times, which wasted her time, which meant she could ask less questions and address less of the things that she wanted to address. The main thing that she seemed to want to get him to admit was that he thinks is in his official capacity as a director of the HHS, that men can get pregnant. That's something that a lot of voters would object to. And I think so there's a lot of political sway in getting people like that in those positions to say shit like that for that reason. She seemed to want to get him to admit that gender affirming care entails the mutilation of body parts, surgically or otherwise, of children. A lot of people are very uncomfortable with that, deeply uncomfortable with that. A lot of people would vote against that shit, which is one of the reasons why there's a lot of political cachet in getting people like that in that official capacity, or who have those kinds of positions to say shit like that. She wasn't that successful. She did quote something that he said. He didn't really own it. He kind of was very blasé about it, and he kept saying, I guess, the politically correct thing, which is, I affirm, transgender care and transgender youth getting what they need, and politicians like you should stay out of it. And so he kind of won in some of those exchanges, if not overall. But the reason why I even wanted to show it was I wanted to show a kind of pattern that I'm recognizing with these kinds of exchanges between people with clear ideologically distinct presuppositions about the same issues. There's a lot of talking past each other, but there's a lot of like tacit. There seems to be, and that was pronounced in the instance I just showed you, awareness that the other side is up to something, and they're trying to leverage those moments to win political points. And so there's a kind of gamesmanship being had there, and it's sacrificing genuine engagement with very serious topics in order to score points for one's tribe. And so while I have my own views about the kind of the nature of these exchanges, in terms of the specifics of them, and I have my own opinions on these issues that are germane to them, overall, the big picture thing that I wanted to highlight today, if nothing else, was the state of our intellectual discourse is so terrible that we are getting silliness instead of politics. It's become a clown show. It's a shit show. But we in a fundamental way crave the genuine back and forth. So much so that we will tune into Joe Rogan talk to some random motherfucker for 8 hours, insofar as at the very least they're going to have some kind of good faith engagement with the issue and talk about it in a way that our late night political shows and talk shows and even committee hearings in the Senate and Congress don't even allow for. Ain't that a bitch? Like we really crave that serious level of engagement. And I think that our discourse would be served much better if we had people do what I tried to model today, and probably imperfectly. I have my own biases and whatnot, which was at least a good faith attempt to see both sides, articulate both sides, get into the nuance, get into the nitty gritty, ask, like genuinely engage in a way that it's like, okay, like if I was on the other side, what might I think and why? What is consistent with it? How do I steel man it? How do I strengthen it? How do I make it better? As opposed to just smugly dismissing everything that you disagree with. Like there's no validity on any side but yours. Like what the fuck? Like I guess maybe, but it just seems unlikely that you have it all figured out when you're never wrong. There's a single person in our entire society for whom that's true. Is very unlikely, including me. I include myself in that. It's very unlikely that I'm right about every single thing that I think. So that's kind of the moral of the story here. But yeah, we started with the whole woke Planned Parenthood doctor claims men can have pregnancies. We moved on to talk about, to talk about the Young Turks and how they covered this story, and even move forward to kind of give more examples of these kind of tribalistic exchanges in actual hearings in the Senate and in the House, either subcommittees or whatever. I'm deeply saddened by the state of U.S. politics. It's genuinely disconcerting, and we have the ability to do better. However unlikely that it is that we'll actually do it. And so, my appeal, my wish, my hope is that we get to a point where we recognize that the toxic ways with which we engage with one another are a threat to our society, and an even bigger threat to our democracy than even those who were involved in January 6th. That's my contention. We have to be able to seriously come to the table and in good faith to hash these things out in ideally the most respectful ways possible. But if we can't be respectful, we can at least be honest and engage in good faith. And yes, they're going to be high stakes, and yes, they're going to be heated, and yes, we're going to get upset at each other. I'm not saying we need to hold hands and sing kumbaya, but settling for dunking on the other side as opposed to, or while sacrificing good faith engagement with serious, complicated issues, is not a good way to come to a consensus that's realistic and helps the American people. What's at stake is our ability to be able to solve problems in a society such as ours and avoid creating more with bad policies that are motivated by a kind of vitriol and enmity towards our political rivals, as opposed to a genuine good faith and thorough understanding of the nature of a problem. So if I could snap my fingers, I had my magic wand, I would wish away this political tribalism that we have, and in its place, a firm resolve that people on all sides of the political aisle or political spectrum stick to. And that is, no matter what, no matter how heated things get, no matter how much we disagree, we are going to come to the table in good faith, and we're going to hash it out, and we're going to discuss these things, and we're going to try our best to come to a consensus as reasonable as possible, taking into account all of the issues, taking into account our own fallibility and how we might be wrong about things, taking into account the fact that very likely when it comes to complex issues, both sides have validity to it. That's what I wish. That's my wish for our country. And the only way in which I'm committed to that right now is I am creating content that is designed to model what that looks like. Even if I end up arguing with myself to an audience of 10 people. But to my faithful 10, thank you for watching. And until next time, peace.